My boss looked me in the eye, smirked, and said, "You're finished here, Arthur. Company restructuring. You understand how business works." After 29 years of breaking my back for this place, I was thrown out like garbage, just days before my retirement benefits were set to begin. I signed the papers quietly, but inside, something cracked. That night, while my wife slept and my children wondered why their father came home defeated, I dialed one number. I wasn't calling for revenge with fists. I was calling for something far quieter, far deadlier. By dawn, the first domino had already fallen. 29 years. That number had been my badge of honor, the proof of every late night, every missed family dinner, every moment I chose my career over my own life. Just one more week, I told myself. One more week until the pension I had earned was locked in. Yet even before that week arrived, the cracks were already there, spreading silently like fractures in old glass. I still remember the night I came home late and found the kitchen table set for 3, candles melted down to stubs, plates of cold food untouched. My son had gone to bed angry, my wife's eyes red from tears. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you love that company more than you love us." I didn't know how to answer. She wasn't wrong. I told myself I was building a future, but what good was a future if the present slipped through my hands? Every morning, I put on my suit and carried myself like a man who mattered. I wasn't the green kid I had once been. I had climbed from the bottom rung, survived countless restructures, earned the respect, or at least the fear, of those beneath me. But the higher I went, the more I noticed the shadows. Files that didn't add up, numbers that magically balanced when they shouldn't have, a quiet pattern of money disappearing into places unnamed. One evening, long after everyone had gone home, I stared at a spreadsheet until my vision blurred. There it was. Hidden entries, altered timestamps. Someone was cooking the books, and it wasn't sloppy work. Whoever it was knew exactly how to bury the evidence. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. Should I report it? After all, silence meant complicity. But after 29 years, with 1 week left until retirement, could I risk it? What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed quiet, knowing a single word might destroy everything you built? The next morning, I forced myself to focus on the small victories. Only a week left, then the email arrived. Mandatory meeting. Attendance required. My stomach turned as I stared at the screen. Why a meeting so close to the end? Why now? Still, I walked into the conference room with my head high. Faces turned away. Conversations cut off as I approached. It was subtle at first. Colleagues who used to share coffee with me now avoided eye contact. A project I had led from conception to near completion was suddenly reassigned. The credit quietly shifted to someone else. The betrayal stung worse than I'd imagined. Daniel, a man I once mentored, the man who stood at my wedding as my best friend, was suddenly the star. He presented my ideas, my research, with a confidence that only comes when one is too comfortable with theft. "Brilliant strategy," the director said, nodding at him. Daniel didn't even glance at me. That night was my wife's birthday. I promised I'd be home early. I even picked up flowers. But just as I reached for my coat, my manager called me into another urgent discussion. Hours passed. By the time I walked through the door, the candles were burnt out again, the dinner untouched. My wife didn't even yell. She simply blew out the last candle, shook her head, and whispered, "You're not here anymore, Arthur." I stood frozen, flowers wilting in my hand. The next day, Daniel leaned over my desk, his voice low but sharp. "Arthur, you're not really part of the team anymore, you understand, right?" His smile was thin, rehearsed. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal dressed as pity. I forced myself to keep calm, but inside, a storm raged. Was this the plan all along? To bleed me dry, take my years, my ideas, and then cut me loose? Later that week, I lingered near the stairwell when I overheard a voice. Daniel's voice. "Yes, it's confirmed. Hayes will be out by Friday. Don't worry, he won't fight it. He never does." My name. My fate. Spoken as if I were a pawn already swept from the board. For 29 years, I had been loyal. For 29 years, I had chosen silence over conflict, dedication over dreams. But in that moment, standing in the shadows of the stairwell, I felt something harden inside me. The plan to end me had already begun. And for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I realized silence would no longer save me. The boardroom was colder than I remembered, though perhaps it wasn't the room, but the eyes that watched me when I walked in. A row of executives sat at the polished mahogany table, papers neatly stacked, pens lined like weapons. I took my seat, the weight of 29 years pressing on my shoulders. The CEO, Richard Sloan, leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. He let the silence linger, enjoying the discomfort before speaking. "Arthur Hayes," he said evenly, "thank you for your service." It was the kind of line given at funerals, not meetings. My stomach knotted. "We've reviewed the structure of the company," Sloan continued, lips curling into a faint smirk. "And unfortunately, your role has been made redundant. Company restructuring, you understand. Business is business." Laughter, stifled, polite, passed through the room like a draft. 29 years, reduced to a sentence. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "Redundant? I've led the department for over a decade. My pension will not be affected," he interrupted, a lie dressed in courtesy. But of course, only after the official eligibility date, which was days away. He didn't need to say it. The cruelty was implied. He stood, extended his hand across the table. The handshake was firm, practiced, a gesture he must have given 100 men before me. But to me, it felt like ice. A micro cliffhanger moment where the room tilted, and I realized this was the end. I signed the papers in silence, the sound of my pen scratching louder than my breath. Sloan clapped my shoulder as if he were granting me a favor. "You'll land on your feet. Men like you always do." When I returned home, the silence was heavier than in the boardroom. My wife stood in the kitchen, tears streaking her face. She didn't need me to explain. She saw the envelope in my hand. "After everything, Arthur," she cried. "After everything you gave them?" My son emerged from his room, fists clenched, eyes burning. He didn't say a word. He just shook his head and walked out the door, leaving me in the wreckage of my own home. I sat alone at the table, hands trembling as I pulled out the documents. That's when I noticed something strange in the small print. The phrasing, the clauses. It wasn't just me. This wasn't about Arthur Hayes. This was a policy. They had a strategy, an entire campaign designed to cut loose men and women like me, employees who had given their lives to the company, all to save a few million in pension costs. A quiet purge dressed up as restructuring. The betrayal was bigger than I imagined. Could I fight it? The thought of lawsuits, courtrooms, endless fees flashed through my mind. They had armies of lawyers. I had a dwindling bank account. Was I to sink the last of my savings into a war I couldn't win, or walk away silently, letting them erase me? As the night dragged on, I sat in the dark, staring at my phone. I thought of every injustice, every stolen credit, every broken promise. Then, almost without thinking, I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Arthur Hayes," came the voice on the other end, deep and familiar. "Matthew," I said, "I need a favor." There was a pause, then a sharp exhale. I've been waiting for this call for 10 years. A micro cliffhanger hung in the silence. My pulse quickened. Matthew wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a fixer. He was a journalist, an investigative reporter I once saved from losing a source during a corporate scandal decades ago. He owed me. "Arthur," he continued, his tone shifting to steel, "you're not the only one. I've got files, names, dozens of men and women tossed aside before their benefits kicked in. They thought no one would connect the dots." The room spun. I wasn't alone. My pain was multiplied, mirrored in others who had walked the same path, discarded like trash. Later that night, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. My wife had fallen asleep. Exhaustion and grief carving lines into her face. I whispered to her, though she could not hear, "I can't let this happen again. Not to me, not to anyone." But then came the dilemma. If I worked with Matthew, if we made this public, thousands of employees could lose their jobs in the fallout. Entire families could suffer because of the truth I helped uncover. Could I carry that weight? Or would silence once again be my curse? I didn't answer the question, not then. I only knew I could not stay still. The next morning, the world shifted. In the heart of the corporate tower, as Richard Sloan addressed the board, a sudden silence cut through the chatter. His face drained of color, his hand clutched his chest, and before anyone could react, he collapsed to the floor. And just like that, the man who had smirked at my downfall was gasping for his own breath, while chaos erupted around him. The morning after Sloan's collapse, the headlines were everywhere. Corporate giant under fire. Insider claims systematic abuse of senior staff. I sat at my kitchen table, paper spread before me, coffee untouched. My hands trembled as I traced the words. Matthew hadn't wasted time. The story had teeth, and it was biting. The phone rang before I could take a sip. Matthew's voice was sharp, urgent. "Arthur, you don't understand what you've just stepped into." A micro cliffhanger hung in the air, cutting deeper than his words. "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat dry. "You thought Sloan was the monster, didn't you?" he said. "He wasn't the mastermind. He was just a pawn. There's an entire network behind this. Men who built their fortunes on purging people like you. Sloan was expendable. But you, Arthur, you're dangerous now." The line clicked dead before I could reply. I sat frozen, the newspaper trembling in my hand. That evening, as I tucked my youngest daughter into bed, her eyes searched mine with quiet fear. "Dad," she whispered, "did you do something wrong? Everyone at school says you're in the paper." Her words cut sharper than Sloan's smirk ever had. "No," I said softly, stroking her hair. "I did what was right. But sometimes, doing right looks like doing wrong to people who are afraid of the truth." When I kissed her goodnight, I carried the weight of her doubt like a stone in my chest. The next day, whispers filled the office halls. Former colleagues avoided me outright. Others stared with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Then the press conference came. The interim CEO stood before flashing cameras and declared, "Arthur Hayes manipulated financial records to serve his own interests. His false claims have damaged this company's reputation." The betrayal was swift, the narrative rewritten in an instant. Overnight, I was no longer the victim. I was the villain. Anger roared in my veins, but so did fear. Should I keep pushing or step back before my family paid the price? If I stopped, I could fade into obscurity, rebuild quietly. But if I continued, the storm would consume everything I loved. I chose silence that evening, until I stepped outside to take the trash. Across the street, a car idled with its lights off. A silhouette sat behind the wheel, unmoving. The hair on my arms bristled. I was being watched. From that moment, I knew the game had changed. Days later, I returned home to find an envelope in my mailbox, no return address. Inside was a thick folder of documents, contracts, emails, signatures, evidence, and one note scrawled in uneven handwriting. "You'll need this more than I will." A micro cliffhanger that turned my veins to ice. Who had sent it? And why risk their own safety to help me? That night, as I laid the folder on the dining table, my wife stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face pale. "Arthur," she said, her voice barely steady, "if they hurt you, what happens to us? To the kids?" I wanted to lie, to tell her everything would be fine. Instead, I told the truth. "I don't know, but if I do nothing, they win forever." She turned away, tears streaking her cheeks. "Then maybe winning isn't worth it." Her words echoed long after she left the room. The next morning, the news twisted again. Sloan, recovering in the hospital, pointed the finger squarely at me. "Arthur Hayes orchestrated false narratives to discredit the company," he told reporters. "He betrayed us all." I clenched my fists until my nails drew blood. The man who had destroyed me was now painting me as the architect of the disaster. And yet, out of nowhere, an ally emerged. At a press briefing, one of my former colleagues, a quiet man named Leonard, stepped forward. "That's a lie," he said into the microphones. "I worked under Arthur for years. He never manipulated anything. If anything, he was the one who caught mistakes others buried." The room erupted, the story splintering once more. For the first time, I wasn't alone, but relief was short-lived. The phone rang again that night, a new voice this time, low and cold. "Mr. Hayes, you have something that doesn't belong to you. Stop before this gets ugly." I looked at the folder on my desk, the weight of its secrets pressing down. Should I release it now and burn the whole company down? Or wait, gather more proof, and risk giving them time to destroy me? That was the dilemma that haunted me as I stared out my window. And then headlights cut across my lawn. A black sedan pulled up, idling, before rolling slowly away. It wasn't the same car as before. This was new. They weren't just watching. They were circling closer. The silent war had begun. The first wave hit on a Monday morning. Stock tickers bled red across every financial channel, the company's value plummeting by billions in mere hours. The press couldn't get enough. Headlines screamed betrayal, corruption, abuse. It was as if the whole world had been waiting for the fall, and now they wanted blood. I watched from my living room, the glow of the TV casting shadows on the wall. For a brief moment, there was a taste of satisfaction. The empire that had chewed me up and spit me out was collapsing under its own lies. Yet even in that satisfaction, Unease gnawed at me. Was I unleashing something I couldn't control? Then another article surfaced, not from Matthew this time, but from an anonymous source. Documents, photos, internal memos, evidence I had never seen before, splashed across the front pages. A micro cliffhanger that left me breathless. Someone else was fighting from the inside. Days later, Matthew called. "Arthur, you're not alone," he said. "You've got allies you don't even know about." He was right. Buried within the leaks was a connection I hadn't expected. Emails from a senior executive's niece, secretly forwarding files to journalists. She was family to the very people at the top, yet she risked everything to expose them. Why? Perhaps conscience. Perhaps revenge. Either way, it wasn't just me anymore. The weight of it all pressed heavier each day. My son, who hadn't spoken to me since that night he stormed out, called unexpectedly. He wanted to go fishing, something we hadn't done since he was a boy. We sat by the lake, lines cast in silence, the cool wind carrying unspoken words between us. Finally, he broke it. "I thought you were weak, Dad, always taking their beatings. But you're stronger than I knew." My throat tightened. I'm not sure strength is the right word. I'm just tired of letting them win. We sat together in peace for the first time in years, but even that moment carried a shadow. Was it fair to drag my family deeper into this storm? Should I step back, now that the cracks were already showing? Or push harder, knowing there was no going back? The dilemma gnawed at me. Before I could answer it for myself, the news exploded again. Cameras swarmed the company headquarters as men in suits stormed the glass doors. Economic police, armed with warrants, marched in under flashing lights. The dominoes had begun to fall, and there was no stopping them now. But the storm was only beginning. Within a week, half the senior board was suspended, dragged into hearings that aired live on television. Lawyers scrambled, statements contradicted each other, and whispers of larger conspiracies grew louder. And then came the twist. This wasn't confined to one company. The leaked documents revealed ties, contracts, shell companies, hidden transfers that connected my old employer to at least 3 other major corporations. The corruption was systemic, sprawling, and far beyond anything I had imagined. Reporters circled like vultures. And then, one headline in bold print: "Arthur Hayes is the whistleblower?" My face plastered across the evening news, my name trending online. The micro cliffhanger slammed into my chest. I had fought in the shadows, but now the light found me. That evening, my daughter buried her face in her hands, tears streaming. "Dad, they're calling you a traitor on TV, my friends. They ask if you're going to jail." I held her close, heartbreaking. "I'm not a traitor," I whispered. "I'm just trying to make it right." But even as I said it, doubt clawed at me. Should I step forward, claim my place in this chaos, and risk my family's safety? Or remain hidden, letting the storm rage without my face at the center? The dilemma gnawed deeper than ever. One night, as I sat in the dark, staring at the headlines, I heard a knock at the door. My wife stiffened. My daughter froze. Slowly, I opened it. There stood Richard Sloan, the man who had fired me, the man who once smiled as he stole my life. But his face wasn't smug now. It was hollow, haunted. "I'm not here to fight," he said quietly. "We need to talk." The dominoes had fallen so far that even my enemy had come seeking me. Richard Sloan stood in my doorway like a ghost who had wandered back from the grave. The man who once smirked as he ended my career now looked pale, shoulders sagging beneath the weight of something darker than shame. My wife hovered behind me, tense, ready to shut the door in his face, but I raised a hand. "Arthur," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't want it to happen this way. I never had a choice." I let him inside, against every instinct that screamed at me to leave him in the cold. We sat at the dining table where so many arguments with my wife had been born, but tonight it was silent, heavy with expectation. "You think I was your enemy," Sloane said, staring at his trembling hands. "But the truth is, I was a pawn, just like you. There's a network, Arthur. An invisible hand that runs deeper than this company, deeper than me. I did what they ordered. If I resisted, I would have been ruined. Or worse." I wanted to laugh in his face, but his eyes held no smugness, only fear. "So you're telling me all those years of theft, of betrayal, of discarding men like me? That was you just following orders?" "Yes," he whispered, "and no. I played my part, but the game is far bigger than I imagined." He pulled a thick envelope from his coat and slid it across the table. My heart thudded. "This," he said, "will show you what you're really up against." A micro cliffhanger twisted the room into silence. I opened it cautiously. Inside were files, contracts, and correspondence that connected not just my company, but a web of corporations, banks, and faceless trusts. Offshore accounts, political payoffs, entire careers destroyed by a system designed to feed itself. Sloane's voice shook. "They own senators, regulators, judges. They build and destroy fortunes like pulling strings on puppets. You think you hurt them, Arthur? You've barely scratched the surface." The weight of the pages pressed on my chest like stone. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about revenge or pensions. It was about something that could topple industries, maybe even governments. That night, I held my wife and daughter close. "I'm doing this for us," I whispered into the darkness, "so no one else will have to choose between their family and their dignity." But even as I said it, doubt gnawed at me. Should I ally myself with Sloane, a man who had broken me, or should I stand alone against an army too vast to face? The dilemma tore me apart, and then, flipping deeper into the files, I froze. Names. People I never imagined were part of it. Friends, colleagues, officials I thought incorruptible. The cliffhanger hit like a blow. I had stumbled onto a truth that could shake the nation. The following week, Matthew and I sat in his office, papers spread across the floor, like the wreckage of a plane crash. "Arthur," he said, "if we go public with this, it won't just end your old company. It will send shockwaves across the entire financial sector. Tens of thousands could lose their jobs." I stared at the names again, faces swimming in my memory. The price of truth was no longer mine alone to pay. Then Matthew leaned forward, voice low. "You're not alone in this. There's something I didn't tell you. Others have been waiting. They've been silent for years, gathering scraps, terrified to speak out. You're the spark they needed. A mini twist that made my breath catch. The ace up my sleeve wasn't just this folder. It was a network of survivors, men and women discarded like me, ready to rise together. For the first time, I felt the ground shift under my feet, not from fear, but from possibility. That night, my daughter crawled into my lap as I read through the files again. "Dad," she asked softly, "will they ever pay for what they did?" I kissed her forehead. "Justice might come late," I said, but it never fails to arrive. Still, the question clawed at me. Should I release everything, knowing it could destroy innocent lives along with the guilty? Or should I hold back, protecting some, and risk letting the cancer grow again? The choice hung over me like a blade. When the morning sun crept through the blinds, I knew whatever decision I made would not just change my life, but the lives of millions. The cliffhanger was no longer just mine to carry. It belonged to an entire industry trembling on the edge of collapse. The storm eventually passed, though its wreckage stretched across the headlines for months. Companies crumbled, lawsuits flooded the courts, and names once spoken with reverence became synonymous with corruption. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt most was exhaustion. For nearly 3 decades, I had given myself to a machine that betrayed me, and then to a war I never asked for. What I wanted now was something smaller, something human. I turned down interviews, ignored cameras, and quietly accepted a position at a workers' advocacy group. The office was small, tucked above a laundromat, nothing like the glass towers I once haunted. But here, the mission was clear: to protect employees from the kind of abuse that nearly destroyed me. It wasn't until my first meeting that I realized the truth. The organization wasn't founded by strangers. It was built by people like me. Former employees who had been discarded, silenced, or betrayed by the same system. We were the forgotten, now standing together. A mini twist that pulled me deeper into a new purpose. Word spread quickly. Articles shifted from scandal to resilience, and a movement began to grow. Across the country, workers stood taller, unions revived, and whispers of reform turned into demands. A micro cliffhanger stirred each week as more voices joined the cause, more documents leaked, more truth uncovered. Yet for all the noise, I found my own quiet victories. One morning, I walked my granddaughter to school, her small hand wrapped in mine. The streets were filled with ordinary life: buses, laughter, the smell of coffee from a corner shop. For the first time in years, I felt peace. But peace is never without temptation. Should I rest here, content with what I had accomplished? Or should I step back into the fight, risking everything all over again? The dilemma pulled at me, even in my happiest moments. The answer came sooner than expected. My phone buzzed one evening, a message glowing on the screen. Arthur Hayes, we need your help. Another company is doing the same thing. Please. The cliffhanger pressed like a weight on my chest. Could I turn away, knowing others were about to be broken the same way I was? The following months brought closure I hadn't dared imagine. My old company, stripped bare by investigations, collapsed entirely. Its remains were absorbed, its leaders disgraced. For the first time, regulators acted with real force. Entire industries shifted, policies rewritten under public pressure. One afternoon, as I left the advocacy office, I nearly walked past him. Daniel, the man who once stole my work, smiled as he cut me out. But he wasn't dressed in sharp suits anymore. He wore a simple jacket, carrying pamphlets for a charity that helped unemployed workers. He looked older, broken in a way arrogance could no longer hide. When our eyes met, he lowered his head. Not a word, just a nod of respect. A mini twist I never expected. Betrayal had turned to humility. Then came the invitation. A letter embossed with international seals, asking me to speak at a global ethics conference. We believe your story can inspire change worldwide, it read. A micro cliffhanger of its own. Me, once discarded, now asked to teach others. But the greatest gift came at home. On my daughter's birthday, I sat at the kitchen table with cake and candles, surrounded by family. No excuses, no missed dinners, no empty chairs. As I cut the first slice, my daughter smiled through tears. "I don't remember the last time you were here for this," she said. I squeezed her hand, unable to speak. And in that moment, I understood. Justice wasn't just the downfall of corrupt men. It was being present for the people who mattered most. Looking out the window that night, the city lights twinkling like stars, I thought of everything lost and everything gained. Sometimes, I whispered to myself, to change the world, you only need the courage to say no to injustice. I leaned back in my chair, watching my family laugh in the next room. For the first time in decades, my heart felt light. At the edge of the window, the reflection of an old man stared back. Older, worn, but not defeated. I smiled at him. "Finally," I said softly, "I kept my promise."